Have you ever tried to cut a little tiny piece of wood like this on your table saw and do it safely? It's hard. But today on Woodworking with Wes, I'm going to show you how with something that you might not have ever thought of. Let's take a look. Let me introduce you to a little clamp called a toggle clamp. It works really well for a jig that you're trying to hold your wood down to. You screw it to the jig that you're using. This little plunger here is adjustable in height and distance. And once you get it all set up, you put your piece of wood underneath here and you clamp it down and it holds it tight. Now, the little piece of wood that I showed you is a piece of wood that I have to cut several times over. So I've made a jig, and I'm going to show you how that jig works. I'm going to show you how I adjusted the toggle clamp and made sure it worked, and some safety features about setting up your little jig with your toggle clamp that you need to keep in mind. Let's go to the table saw. Now I'm cutting this piece of wood like I showed you. This little wedge that I'm cutting, I have to do many of. And so I build a jig that cuts one side and then the other using a hold down with my toggle clamp. Let me show you how I get started, but then I'm going to show you how the jig works and keeps you safe. Here's the little block of wood I start with. It fits in this jig, and I have two cuts to make, and so I've made cut number 1 and cut number 2. But the main thing about this is holding it safely. That toggle clamp goes down there, and that piece of wood now is tight. I can't move it. I can't pull it out. It really holds it down tight. The little rubber foot on your toggle clamp really presses down tight and hard, and you can adjust it. Let me grab my wrench here. You can adjust it by these two bolts. You can adjust the height of this and the position of this so that your rubber foot goes down and holds tight on your stock that you're doing. The one thing, and then the way I have this set up is I have my saw blade set at the width of the base of my jig. Let me show you one other thing that I did that you need to keep in mind. When you lower your toggle switch down, you don't want the end of your toggle switch hanging over your blade. So what I did, I put an upright piece of wood so that I could tell where my blade ran and made sure that the end of my toggle switch wasn't over the top of the blade. Now the blade is never going to be that high. The blade is only going to be high enough to cut my stock. But I just wanted to be safe, make sure that my toggle switch wasn't, my toggle clamp, excuse me, I keep calling it a toggle switch, it's a toggle clamp. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't over the top of the blade. If we turn around to the other side, same thing. Make sure that that toggle clamp is not over the top of the blade. And this really holds down your wood good and tight. Let's go ahead and show you how it works and how you're able to keep your hands away from the blade as you're cutting. Here's our piece of stock to get started. Down tight with our toggle clamp. I have my blade set just to the height to cut through my wood. And the way I determined that is I took my jig with my stock clamped in it, and I set my blade just high enough to cut through it. So like I say, it wasn't up that high anyway, but I made sure that my blade was not any higher than it needed to be. My saw fence is set to the width of the base of my jig so that it cuts right down the edge of the jig. And that way I know where my cut line is going to be. My cut line is going to be right where the end of my jig is. I put my stock in, I hold it down so that it's tight in my, this is the backstop that I set for my cut. I make sure that my piece of wood is tight into my backstop piece. Let me go ahead and I'm able to hold on to my toggle clamps out here so I don't have to have my hands anywhere close to the blade. Let's cut one. Okay, we waited for our saw to come to a stop. We pulled our jig out of the way, and here's our piece of wood all cut to size. Now we turn it around the other way. We turn our piece of stock around the other way, and here's our other clamp, down tight. And we don't need to reset our saw. We don't need to reset the height of our blade. We're all set up for cut number 2. Let's cut it. Okay, again, we waited for our blade to come to a stop. I was able to hold on to my clamps out here, so my hands were never ever close to the blade, and I was able to push it all the way through and make sure that I made my cut safe. And there's our perfect little wedge. Nice and clean and straight on both sides, just like we needed to have it, and I never had my hands close to the blade. That's a great little thing to remember to have. These toggle clamps are great for jigs. I've used them a lot on different kinds of jigs, but these are great little jig clamps. Keep that in mind, and they're available at Amazon. I'm going to give you a link to those, but just a way to keep your hands safe as you're running little pieces through your saw. All right, fun to know how to learn how to do things here on Woodworking with Wes.